Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. As we mark the first anniversary of major constitutional changes in Jammu and Kashmir, it's time to ask the question, is the Modi government right in believing that Article 370 and Article 35A nurtured and promoted separatism and terrorism? Or did the Modi government make a terrible mistake? That's a key issue I shall put today to someone who spent more than 20 years in the Intelligence Bureau, serving mainly in Kashmir and Pakistan, Avinash Mohanani. Mr. Mohanani, I want to discuss the two articles you've written on Kashmir for the Economic Times, one yesterday, one today. And let me begin by repeating the striking words with which you began your first article. You write, it came as a huge surprise to those who have dealt with or were posted in Kashmir when the Prime Minister asserted that Articles 370 and 35A of the Constitution were responsible for separatism and terrorism. Now, the PM called the changes implemented on August the 5th last year historic. In contrast, you say you disagree vehemently. Does that mean you believe the PM made a mistake?
My view will be clear on these 2 points. Number one, I have dealt with Kashmir for long, and I know for sure that these two articles were not responsible for the same. Coming from the Prime Minister, it came as a surprise to me, a huge surprise to me, because this was not somebody from IT cell of a party organization or the embedded media speaking and creating that smoke screen of lies. But it was coming from Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister is an institution which is respected across the country. People listen to him carefully. People believe him totally. On TV, he's into the bedrooms of crores of Indians. So my view was that my understanding was that this was not perhaps correct version which Prime Minister said. Second aspect would be that then we'll be letting the Pakistan free.
So when you say this is not perhaps correct, you're saying in fact the PM made a mistake.
Yeah, the narrative was not right. And what will happen is that we have scrapped these two articles, we have brought in changes, and 1 year down the line, has it changed on both these counts? So we'll have to examine on those issues, whether it has really changed the separatism and the terrorism aspect.
Let's then examine what you write in those two articles, first about separatism and then terrorism. I'll start with separatism, I'll come to terrorism in part 2 after the commercial break. You make very clear that in October 1949, when Article 370 was written into the Indian Constitution, the sentiment of separatism did not exist either before or after. So am I right in saying to you that the seeds of separatism were perhaps sown with the unconstitutional dismissal of Sheikh Abdullah's government in 1953 and the fact that he was then arrested without charges? Is that when the seeds of separatism were first sown?
Yes, absolutely, no doubt about it. Because you see, there were differences between Sheikh Abdullah and the National Conference on one hand, and the Indian leadership, which I will say it consisted of Jawaharlal Nehru, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, and Gopalaswamy Iyengar, who was the point person of Nehru on Kashmir. So there were differences. There were serious differences when Sheikh Abdullah moved his government towards delivering on the Naya Kashmir document, which is considered as a kind of a communist manifesto by some people, where he gradually started making laws for land to the tiller. And that is where the red flags went up. And the differences became almost irreconcilable between the two, because they thought that the Sheikh is consolidating his constituency in the valley. So differences became irreconcilable, but then the government continued and there was no separatism.
Absolutely.
And the first time.
But the point I'd like to make for the audience is that if the first seeds of separatism were sown in 53 when the Sheikh was unconstitutionally dismissed and then arrested without charges, the Prime Minister of the day was Jawaharlal Nehru. Doesn't it then follow that the first spark that set separatism alight came from Jawaharlal Nehru?
Yes, whatever may be the compulsion Nehru had within the Congress party, that's a different thing. That's a long story. One can go on. But the issue is that then Nehru agreed. In fact, if you read B.N. Malik's book, My Days with Nehru on Kashmir, Nehru was party to the decision. Karan Singh, Nehru, and they were party to the decision to dismiss Sheikh Abdullah. The problem was that Bakshi Ghulam Muhammad was not even willing to take oath till not only he is dismissed, he is arrested. So the arrest decision was taken to somehow install Bakshi Ghulam Muhammad back as a prime minister there.
Absolutely. And as you point out in your articles, disillusionment with Delhi began at that stage. But you also say that with the restoration of Sheikh Abdullah in 1977 and the holding of free and fair elections, the Kashmiris were once again reconciled and had faith in Indian democracy, and that lasted till 1984, when Indira Gandhi carried out a midnight coup against Sheikh's son Farooq Abdullah. For those who don't remember 84, briefly tell us, what was it that Indira Gandhi did at midnight that resulted in Farooq losing office?
Karan, I would first go into the what happened in 77, because 77 election is a very crucial elections in J&K. And next election I will come, which is another crucial elections in J&K. But 77 was certainly a huge turning point in the electoral history of J&K. Even the first Constituent Assembly, when it was formed in 1951, had allegations of rigging in the form of rejection of nomination of Praja Parishad members. Praja Parishad was a kind of a Bharatiya Jansangh in Jammu region, because RSS had a wing which was called Praja Parishad there. 11 nominations were rejected in the first election for the Constituent Assembly in 1951 of belonging to Praja Parishad. Now, this is unbelievable. On flimsy ground, the nominations were rejected. So the first free and fair elections were held in 1977, and mind you, who was the prime minister that time? It was Morarji Desai. In fact, the saying is that the Janata Party, which was formed in J&K, the leaders of that party had gone and met Morarji and hinted towards what happens in J&K, the manipulation in the election.
Okay.
And he was wild with those people. And again, mind you, Bharatiya Jansangh was part of that.
So the point you're making is that it wasn't just the restoration of Sheikh Abdullah, but also the first election of 77 it was free and fair.
Absolutely.
Together, these restored the faith of the Kashmiris in Indian democracy. The faith that had been shaken when Sheikh Abdullah was unlawfully, unconstitutionally removed was restored roughly 23, 24 years later. Come now to the way Indira Gandhi once again shook and demolished that faith. What is it that she did in 84 when she removed Farooq Abdullah at midnight?
The problem with Mrs. Gandhi was once after the death of Sheikh, Farooq Abdullah became the chief minister there. And she wanted Farooq Abdullah to form alliance with the Congress in the 1983 assembly elections, which Farooq refused. In fact, a meeting was called in Delhi, and Farooq was to discuss this thing, this seat adjustment with Rajiv Gandhi, and he did not go for the meeting. And later he told that it was impossible for me because Madre Meherban, wife of Sheikh Abdullah and his mother, she would not agree, and she would say that don't forget that how Congress treated your father in 1953 and afterwards. So the alliance did not take place, and Mrs. Gandhi was very angry with it. And thereafter, if you recall, N.T. Rama Rao called the first meeting of the opposition leaders in Vijayawada or something place like that, and Farooq joined the group. And he also hosted a meeting in Srinagar. And knowing by the history, Mrs. Gandhi was not used to dissent.
So Mrs. Gandhi's anger was a product of two things. One, that Farooq refused to ally with her party, the Congress party, and secondly, he was in fact allying with the group of opposition parties. As you pointed out, he even hosted an opposition conclave in Srinagar, and this Mrs. Gandhi not only did not like, she would not abide. So she struck at midnight using the powers of her then governor Jagmohan had Farooq
Absolutely.
dismissed, and Farooq was replaced by his own brother-in-law. But does this then not mean that the second blow, which rekindled the embers of separatism, came from another prime minister, this time Indira Gandhi? Her father lit the first spark. That spark was dying down by 77, 78, 80. Mrs. Gandhi rekindled the embers and set the flame of separatism alight again.
Yes, absolutely. Because had it not been dismissal of Farooq Abdullah, situation in Kashmir would have been very different. Because there was a peaceful period and people realized that, look, whatever elected representative that we are selecting, they are ruling us. Maybe there are issues on corruption, etc., but that is everywhere in the country. This is not nothing unusual. Even there was no effort from Pakistan's side to create trouble because they did not find an opening there.
Absolutely. In fact, Mr. Monane, what Mrs. Gandhi in her anguish or anger overlooked is that Farooq may not have allied with Congress, but Farooq was allying with opposition parties from the mainland, and that is another form of Kashmir interlocking itself with mainland politics, and she should have welcomed it, but she resented
Absolutely.
it because the people he was allying with were her opponents.
Yes, yes. And unfortunately, when Farooq was dismissed, none of, I think maybe one or two, but most of the opposition leaders did not raise a hue and cry over this.
Which is, of
That was
course,
it.
one of the problems of Indian politics. When in need, we don't stand by them, and much the same happened when Abdullah and his son Omar were arrested and detained, or Mufti Saab's daughter was detained.
Yes, yes.
The voices of politicians were silent. But you go one step further in your articles. You say, and I'm quoting you, the real
Yes.
trigger that led to a massive upsurge of separatism was the manipulation of the democratic process jointly by the National Conference and the Congress in the 1987 election. Once again,
Yes.
for those who don't remember, briefly recount what was the manipulation that led to rigging in 87?
Look, once Farooq realized that if it doesn't ally with the Congress, nothing is going to happen. He will not be allowed to rule. This is what he learned the lesson from the 84 debacle or the 84 his dismissal. So what he did is, after assassination of Mrs. Gandhi, Rajiv Gandhi became Prime Minister. He allied with Rajiv Gandhi. And they made a seat adjustment in Jammu and Valley. Jammu, where Congress is strong, Congress contested election, NC did not put up election candidates, and vice versa in the Valley. Now the problem was, even this is tolerable, that you ally, but although it should not have happened, but it did happen, and this is a part of democratic process that two parties ally with each other and contest jointly election. But the problem is the rigging in the election. When you decimate the opposition, you don't allow even them to vote. Their countings are suspended. Their elected certificates are torn apart. Now that is, and then when they go to the court, nobody listens to them. This is what happened in the 87 election.
In fact, there's the famous story of Yusuf, who went on to become one of the top militant terrorists like Salahuddin. He was a candidate, he was rigged, he was declared defeated. He got so disillusioned, he left India, went to Pakistan and set up the Hizbul Mujahideen. None of them realized at the time, either Rajiv Gandhi or Farooq Abdullah, that they were playing with fire.
Yes, absolutely.
They actually won an election by rigging at the cost of the faith and confidence Kashmiris had in Indian democracy. They may have won, but they shattered the belief of Kashmiris in Indian democracy.
Absolutely. In fact, as I have learned there in Kashmir, the returning officer had declared Muhammad Yusuf Shah, who is now Salahuddin, elected, and issued a certificate also to him. His opponent in the Amira Kadal constituency, Ghulam Mohyuddin Shah, he was a minister with Farooq Abdullah. He got hold of him by the help of police and got the certificate with him, election certificate. The recounting was ordered, and in the recounting, Ghulam Mohyuddin Shah.
This is a wonderful example of the extent to which the Rajiv Gandhi Farooq Abdullah combination led to blatant rigging. and therefore
Absolutely.
annoyed the people of Kashmir. So tell me this, in this third instance, how much responsibility and blame for this time not just creating separatism but fanning the flames of separatism into almost an uncontrollable fire? How much responsibility and blame lie with Rajiv Gandhi and Farooq Abdullah?
It's almost more than 90%.
Almost more than 90%.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because the crucial thing is, and as we go ahead, when we come to 2002 elections, again things start changing. Although by that time, a lot of violence has taken place, alienation has increased, there are a lot of things that have happened. But 2002 election was another example where free and fair elections were held. Until 1996, as you must be knowing, that we were still using the ballot papers. 2002 was on EVMs.
That's right. And 2002 led to the defeat of Farooq Abdullah and the emergence of a Congress PDP alliance government. But before we go that far, let me sum up what we've so far established. You've said very clearly that it was the way governments both in Delhi and Srinagar trampled over the constitutional rights of the Kashmiri people, rigging elections and then toppling elected governments sometimes at midnight, that actually created separatism and fanned the flames of separatism into an uncontrollable fire. It wasn't Article 370, it wasn't Article 35A.
True. So I am trying to put it in the context so that the country, the world at large, understands that by removing 370 or 35A, we are not going to head anywhere on these two issues.
The truth, Mr. Monani, is that the way Indian politics interfered in Kashmiri politics, the way Indian prime ministers interfered in Kashmiri politics actually created separatism. We made the Kashmiris believe that they could not be masters of their own fate. Delhi would manipulate them, prime ministers would manipulate them, and their chief ministers could only serve at the will and pleasure of the Indian prime minister, not otherwise.
Absolutely.
Now, the paradox, as you point out in your article, Mr. Monani, is that Kashmir actually is a special case that required careful special handling. Not just, as you point out, because it is the only Muslim majority state in a Hindu majority country, but also because Kashmir is the subject of 2 UN resolutions and therefore there's a certain international dimension. But rather than treat Kashmir carefully, it was treated in a cavalier fashion, and the people were humiliated in the sense that their democratic rights were trampled upon.
Yes. And the problem multiplied when the media came in, because then the media was easily used by all the ruling governments in Delhi to demonize Kashmiris, demonize everything, what was happening in Kashmir. And mostly I would say that the narratives were fake. Every day, if you watch TV, a lot of fake narratives are being created. Even today, this is what's happening today also. So
but this is particularly,
we were, rather than owning up Kashmiris, we were throwing them away from us. We wanted them to move away.
This is particularly pointful. Rather than own and embrace Kashmiris, we were throwing them away.
Yes, and like in a house, if we have certain things which are fragile, this was a very fragile state because of its Pakistan dimension, because of its strategic location, etc. We should have taken a lot of care to deal with it.
You pointed out something else about the media. The media began demonizing Kashmiris. Actually, the truth is, the real demons were the Indian politicians who were trying to control Kashmir. But instead of recognizing Indian politicians as demons, the media recognized Kashmiris who were victims, but we recognized them as demons instead. This must have added to the pain and injury Kashmiris felt.
Yes, because whenever I talk to Kashmir, they said, what are you displaying on the media? What are you showing on the media? And you tell, is it the same situation? I have a lot of Kashmiri friends, and I think you also would be having a lot of Kashmiri friends. They are not bad people. They are very nice people, very hospitable, very fun-loving, good people. But the narrative that is created in India about Kashmir is just the opposite.
Just to sum this up, first Indian politicians made it clear to Kashmiris, your democracy will happen on our terms, your chief ministers will function on our terms. If we don't like them, we will remove the chief ministers. If your elections produce the wrong results, we will rig the results. And then the media, instead of sympathizing with the Kashmiris and pointing out that the Kashmiris were being mistreated, converted the Kashmiris into demons. And as a result, I imagine this is where the belief emerged among Kashmiris that we are not treated fairly, that you are not treating us with the same rights that you hold for other people, that you are victimizing us. This sense of being treated unfairly emerges out of all of this.
Injustice is the root cause of all the problems in the world.
Absolutely. Now, set against this, you write, and I'm quoting you, the changes that took place on August the 5th, 2019 have been far more humiliating for Kashmiris than what has happened in the past. In other words, are you fearing that instead of controlling and reducing separatism, Mr. Modi's changes may have given separatism a new lease of life?
Yes, this is my understanding, and my feeling is that no one is going to like it. Even those people who don't stay in Jammu and Kashmir and are Kashmiri Hindus or Muslims, they feel that their state has been downgraded. And the most sensitive, these are all emotive issues, the downgrading of a state, because this has happened for the first time in the history of independent India, that the state has been downgraded to a union territory. And then you bring in domicile law, which is intended to, what changes is to make. And the more than that, the kind of narrative that was created around August 5, before or after. You have a chief minister talking of marrying Kashmiri girls, and you see what kind of narrative, humiliating narrative, was created that time.
So in other words, those steps taken exactly a year ago on 5th August 2019 are going to fuel separatism. They will fuel the sense of alienation that Kashmiris are beginning to feel or have felt for a long time.
My worry is that even those who sided with us, who carried our tricolor flag to every nook and corner, they have also been reduced as separatists. Even those interlocutors, there are so many that in media, in services, in governments, in private, etc., who always argued in favor of India, that how India is a great secular and democratic country. Now, what argument they will have now to explain to the people? There is always a fundamentalist fringe, there is always a pro-Pakistan fringe. So how will they explain? How will the separate Umar Abdullah and these people will say to the separatists that, look, what you were saying?
With what face can Umar Abdullah and Farooq Abdullah face the separatists? Because the separatists will now turn around and say, the way you were treated proves we were right. And I imagine the same is true of Mehbooba Mufti whenever Mehbooba Mufti is released and allowed to enjoy freedom.
Whenever she comes out, yes, she will have the same issue facing her. How will you justify? How will you carry the tricolor again? It's very difficult.
So the only gainers in Kashmir are those who believe in separatism. The BJP has strengthened their hand. The BJP has weakened the position of those who wanted to remain and be India. The Abdullahs, the Muftis have lost, the separatists have gained.
Yes. And it all depends on how we move forward now. Otherwise, if we allow the situation to deteriorate, we allow the problem to continue, then it's time to make corrections. I would only say this much. Changes we should make now.
The government says that over the last year there has been no mass uprising, there have been no mass protests. The government says this is proof that the Kashmiris have accepted what we've done, that the Kashmiris are happy. How do you respond to that?
Look, if you go by the statistics, I've written in my article also, the statistics can be read from left to right and right to left. It's like a script which can be read either way. So if you go by the stone pelting, etc., yes, they are not there. The uprising is not there. I agree that point. I concede that point. But can you be sure that it is going to continue like this? Even Nehru realized it, but it was 10 years later. How much time it will take?
In other words, the anguish, the angst, the pain will build and grow. It may not be emerging on the surface today. It doesn't mean it won't burst through 2-3 years later.
Absolutely. Nobody knows. How will it emerge? What will be the trigger? Whether it will happen now, whether it will happen after a few months or few years down the line, that is very difficult because these are the protests, etc., very organic things.
In other words, Kashmir is like a volcano waiting to erupt. We don't know when it will erupt, but one day it will.
Yes, it could. Yes, that's the possibility.
Let's take a break at that point, Mr. Monani. When I come back, I want to turn to the second article that you've written for the Economic Times. This time, not talking about separatism, but talking about terrorism. In part one, you've demolished the BJP and Mr. Modi's claim that Article 370 and Article 35A were responsible for nurturing and promoting separatism. When I come back, I want to turn to your argument that these two articles are not the cause of terrorism and see how effectively you demolished the second argument made by Mr. Modi and his government. But first, a little break. Welcome back to a special interview for The Wire. My guest is someone who has served at the very top of the Intelligence Bureau for 20 years, spending most of his career in Kashmir and Pakistan, Avinash Mohanani. Mr. Mohanani, let's now come to terrorism. You write that Kashmir faced brutal terrorism even before it acceded to India. I take it what you're talking about is the invasion of Pakistani tribal Lashkars, mainly Pathan tribals, in October 1947, and the pillaging, looting, and killing they did.
Yes, absolutely. Even before merger, the people of Kashmir, irrespective of the religion, they did face this brutal assault on their life, property, liberty, everything. And it was really, really very gruesome. And that is why the Kashmiris were joined hands with the Indian army to fight against the tribal Lashkars that were sent from Pakistan.
Which is why the Kashmiris so welcomed the arrival of the Indian army on the 26th and 27th of October after accession, because of what they suffered at the hands of the Pathan tribals.
Yes. On 27th, when Indian army landed, 27th October, in fact, they landed by Dakota planes and they had no transport available. The transport was provided by the civil administration being run by Sheikh Abdullah. And the NC people, NC volunteers were guiding army to find out where the raiders were.
In what you're saying, in other words, is when the Indian army first arrived, they were seen and welcomed and embraced as saviors. And they were there to protect the Kashmiris from the Pathan tribals and the pillaging and looting the Pathans were doing.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Now you point out in your articles that after acceding to India, Pakistan found no opportunity to provoke violence, even when Sheikh Abdullah in 53 was unconstitutionally removed and arrested without charges, even when Pakistan launched Operation Gibraltar in 65. And I presume the reason is that the Kashmiris remained peaceful because they refused to take to violence themselves.
Yes. They had a experience of 1947 and 48. So Kashmiris were nowhere getting attracted to Pakistan. So Pakistan tried for the violence. In fact, some low-intensity explosions did take place in 1950s after Sheikh Abdullah's arrest, etc. But there was nothing serious in it. So sabotage activities were initiated by Pakistan, but not a regular kind of terrorism or that could be continued in jail.
So the point you're making is that Pakistan's attempt to sabotage, to create violence, to create terror, both in 53 when Sheikh Abdullah was removed and again in 65 with Operation Gibraltar, it failed on both occasions because the Kashmiri people would not have any part of it. The Kashmiris would not participate in violence. They wanted peace. They thwarted Pakistan.
Yes, they did not go with the Pakistan. In fact, the entire premises on which Operation Gibraltar was launched, that once they have infiltrators coming from Pakistan, and their number was huge, more than 10-15,000 people, around 10-15,000 people were infiltrated, some regulars and some non-regulars. They thought that the Kashmiris would rise against India, join hands with these, and thereafter the operation would be launched that was called Grand Slam from Akhnur side to cut off Kashmir from the rest of India. Both were together to be carried out. First Operation Gibraltar and then Operation Grand Slam. But when the first failed, when Kashmiris identified Pakistanis to the Indian army, the operation fizzled out. And soon we had even people in Poonch, in Jammu, in border areas, Gujars, Bakarwas, they pointed out, oh, look, infiltrators are going.
I'm going to interrupt you at that point because you said something very important that I think the audience should hear carefully. Operation Gibraltar, which involved tens of 15,000s of Pakistani infiltrators, failed because the Kashmiris themselves pointed out the infiltrators to the Indian army.
Yes, absolutely.
The Kashmiris did not want to be part of Pakistan. They pointed out Pakistani infiltrators to the Indian army and ensured that Gibraltar failed. The Kashmiris, in other words, once again showed the world, we are Indian, the Pakistanis are enemies, we will not fall into any Pakistani trap of violence.
Absolutely. Now, these are the points that should come in the media rather than the false narrative that is being created.
But unfortunately, the media once again was completely blind to this. It's the reality, it's the truth, but the media either was blind or refused to see. But you point out in your article that after 1971, Pakistan's determination to get revenge because it had lost Bangladesh, then East Pakistan, at Indian hands, was even greater. And Pakistan found its opportunity with the 1987 rigged elections. We talked about those elections in part one. Those were the elections which Farooq Abdullah and Rajiv Gandhi rigged. Those were the elections where Muhammad Yusuf Shah was first declared winner, then declared loser, and went across and became Said Salahuddin and the head of the Hizbul Mujahideen. In 87 or shortly afterwards, something else played to Pakistan's advantage. Developments in Afghanistan. So suddenly, from the late 80s onwards, the situation began to change and Pakistan got the opening it hadn't got for 40 years.
Yes, absolutely. Because that time the Western world allied with Pakistan against the then USSR, and they inducted money, they inducted everything, the Western world. And Pakistan got the people, volunteers or those people, the religious groups who carried out the violence in Afghanistan. Now, once Pakistan was free from Afghanistan, when Russia decided to pull back, now this theater became available, but because by that time the protests had started in the valley. So,
but once again, the opportunity for Pakistan to intervene was the mishandling of the 87 elections and the protests. Had that election not been mishandled, had that not been rigged, leading to protests, Pakistan would not have had the opportunity to intervene in our affairs.
Yes, even if it tried after defeat of USSR in Afghanistan, even if it tried, it would not have succeeded. Because people wanted to live in the peace, and there was nothing there from 84, 87, before 84, 87.
So you're saying something, Mr. Mohanani, very important. The real fundamental cause that created the terror or created the opportunity for the terror was the way Indian politicians deliberately rigged elections. We created the disaffection. We probably created the terrorists like Muhammad Yusuf Shah. Pakistan then got an opportunity which it probably had not dreamt of.
True. This is true.
Now, you say in your article something else that's very important. I'm pushing you only because time is running out. You point out that the ceasefire of 2003, when Atal Bihari Vajpayee was Prime Minister, followed within months with his understanding with Musharraf in January 2004, meant that there was a virtual stop to infiltration. Violence came down substantially. So,
Yes.
violence, terror had been unmitigated from roughly 89 till 2003, but the Vajpayee Musharraf understanding brought it to an end, and that continued for several years until peace was disrupted, you say, because of two developments under Congress rule. The first is the Amarnath land row. The second was the failure to act against the perpetrators of the Marchil fake encounter. Very quickly and briefly, explain to the audience what the Amarnath land row and the failure to act against the Marchil encounter perpetrators meant to Kashmiris. How did they see this?
In the Amarnath land row, what happened? Ghulam Nabi Azad was that time the chief minister of J&K, and he he diverted, I would say, the technical term that Ghulam Nabi Azad used, diverted a land parcel to the Sri Amarnath Ji Shrine Board for the construction of hutments, etc., for permanent hutments, etc. The separatists obviously objected to it, and they said that this is trying to change the demographic composition of the state. The target was, because 2008 we were to have assembly elections in J&K. So the target was the Jammu. Congress wanted to gain seats there in Jammu. So target was electoral consideration, and this was done. And when the situation went out of control, the order was withdrawn. But by that time, the violence has erupted on the streets. There were protests, but still there was no stone pelting that time in 2008 agitation.
Very quickly, before we come to the Marchil encounter, General Sinha was governor, and as governor, he was head of the Amarnath board. Did he have a role to play in the diversion of this land?
The Amarnath Shrine Board, headed by General Sinha, wanted that land to be transferred. And as a governor, yes, he was trying to pressurize. But this was, I would say that it's finally decision lies with the political leadership. If the political leadership doesn't bite the bait, it's final.
And what you're suggesting is that Ghulam Nabi Azad, the Congress chief minister, was prepared to make some sacrifice of Kashmiri interests in the valley because he thought he could gain votes in Jammu.
Absolutely, political gains in Jammu. And this led to loss in Jammu, also loss in the valley also.
And once again, it is politics that created the disaffection in the valley, nothing else. Come very quickly to the impact of failing to act against the perpetrators of Marchil. What did that mean to Kashmiris?
In April 2010, there was an encounter in which army declared that 3 militants have been killed. Subsequently, they were identified as the people who were resident of Jammu Kashmir, not infiltrators, and they were taken by a territorial army man for job in army or for labor work in army. So it took some time for army to do the court martial proceedings, and then they were punished also. They are right now on bail or something. They have been allowed to go free. But the delay that was triggered the protests, because people felt that, look, our 3 civilians have been killed in cold blood and buried, and nothing has happened. So Umar found it really very difficult at that time to control the situation.
And once again, the feeling, and I take it once again, the feeling in the valley is that we are being killed and we're not getting justice. The Indian system is supporting the army, who is accused. I use the word accused because as yet they haven't been found fully guilty. The system is protecting the army. The system won't give us justice.
Yes, that's a problem. That is the feeling that went. And then once the protest started, one protest triggered the another because the deaths were taking place, and it became a huge death toll. And the first time we saw that apart from the protests, there were stone pelting. 2008 protests, there was only protests, only people coming on the street. But this time the stone pelting, heavy stone pelting, and thereafter it has been always like that. The stone pelting takes place.
Let me at this point, Mr. Mohanani, ask you how the Kashmiris perceive and view the Indian army. It's no secret that they look upon the army as an army of occupation. And that is resented by people south of the Bani Hal line. But the question I want to ask you is this. How brutal is the army at times, not always, but at times in its treatment of the Kashmiri people? And how disruptive is the army's presence on their normal life?
Look, when people call this as an occupation army, they call India as an occupational country. So, army being part of the whole setup, what army is handling is the problem that is created by the political leadership. And it's not that they treat army as the brutal force, because there are a lot of individuals who have done good work in army and they have excellent relationship with the people. Army has done a lot of good work, but there may be rotten eggs who create problem.
Can I stop you there? On that thought of rotten eggs who create problem, I am well aware of the excellent Sadbhavna work that the army has been doing and, and the huge impact it makes. But let's be honest. Let's also be honest with each other. Armies in those situations do occasionally also indulge in brutality. I'm not saying the Indian army does it more than any other, but let's not pretend that the Indian army is different to other armies and doesn't do it at all. It even has happened as an accusation against the Indian army in Congo, where we went as part of the UN. So I'm simply asking you this, because you're an individual who's impartial. Have there been instances, maybe not many, but have there been instances where the army has been tough and brutal and it's left the Kashmiris?
There have been instances of some excesses being committed on the Kashmiris. The problem is not the excesses. The problem is because some things happen in the heat of the moment, something happened because of deliberation. There are not many things. But the problem is, can we allow the rule of law in Kashmir, let people get justice if they have been wronged?
So the question really is, Mr. Mohanani, when there have been instances, has that justice happened or has the system covered up on behalf of the army?
Yes, the problem is the justice has not happened. There have been some cases in which the justice have been given. The army has penalized its people, but not in all. And that resentment causes resentment among the people, and the people obviously get angry over this issue.
You've been very honest about that, and I thank you, Mr. Mohanani. Now, against this background, in 2015, the BJP and PDP forged an alliance and they formed a government together, even though the PDP had fought that election, promising to keep the BJP out of the valley. How was this alliance, which Mufti Saab called an alliance of North and South Pole, how was it perceived by the Kashmiris?
Not good. Because they soon realized that the BJP of Mr. Vajpayee and BJP of Mr. Narendra Modi are two different BJPs. And when the agenda started running into trouble, there was the issue of beef ban and all kinds of things. Then the people's anger started building up. And that we saw in 2016 protests. The killing of Burhan Wani was a trigger only. But people were not happy with the alliance and people did not want the BJP to continue in the power because they felt that they voted for the parties which were against BJP.
Did Mufti Saab make a mistake forging an alliance with the BJP? In theory, at least. He had the support of the National Conference in Congress, except that would have been an entirely valley-dominated government and Jammu would have looked like the opposition. So did he make a mistake not allying with other valley parties, or did he have no alternative?
Look, if he had to form the government, there was no alternative because the other parties would not have agreed to join hands with Mufti. But the issue is, even if you make an alliance with the BJP, it has to be reviewed. It has to be changed if things go wrong. So that correction was Mufti was supposed to make, but Mufti did not live long, and he died. This responsibility should have been taken by Mehboobaji. Mehboobaji did not review it, and it went on for long, and the anger continued building.
And as you say, the anger has continued not just building but growing. Today, as a result, we've reached a point where there is growing social acceptance of the fact that young Kashmiris are joining militant groups and terror groups. Not only is there social acceptance, in many instances, their own parents are eulogizing what their children are doing. Newspaper reports clearly suggest that these young Kashmiris are not scared of the army, they are not scared of death. Have we ended up alienating a whole generation of young Kashmiris?
Yes, yes. That is the problem, because I have never seen that Kashmiri militants, when they are trapped, talking to their parents and parents advising them to fight and die for martyrdom. Generally, when we catch hold of parents and tell that ask your son to surrender, they would persuade, they would try to ask him to surrender rather than die. But I've seen videos in which the parents are saying that now be ready for the martyrdom. This is very worrisome for any person who has dealt with Kashmir for so long.
This also suggests, Mr. Monani, that the emotional bond that keeps a country united has fractured in the case of Kashmir and the rest of India. That emotional bond has either fractured or it's weakened very considerably.
I would say it has weakened. It's not fractured, and still we can redress that. Still we can go back to the old situation, gradually come back, gradually take Kashmiris back into our fold.
But
Kashmir is with it. It's not going to go.
Do you see any sign of this government making corrective action, reaching out to Kashmiris, embracing them?
As of now, no. As of now, no.
In fact, let me put you.
No, but it's an evolving situation. It can happen.
Let me put you the articles that have appeared in the papers in the last 2-3 days as we come to the anniversary of today. The government claims that the number of terrorists killed has gone up in the first 7 months of this year. It claims that 150 have been killed. In the corresponding period of last year, it was only 130. And the government is citing this as proof that the situation is under control. Do you accept that? Or is this what you mean when you say statistics can be read left to right or right to left?
Yes, because I feel that if 150 have been killed, these are all youth, local boys, most of them, I would say, not maybe a few Pakistanis also, but most of them are local youth who are not equipped, who don't have good weapons available to them, who have no training. So we are killing them. And if it stops, say, if you say we have killed 150 and now there were 150 and we have killed them all, the game is over. It's not happening that way. The numbers are only increasing. There will be more recruitment. There will be more killings. So where do we stop? Where do we head finally?
You're making a very important point. You're saying the numbers of so-called terrorists and militants that we kill may be going up. But that only shows that the number of people joining militancy is also going up. There is no shortage of young Kashmiris willing to join terrorist groups and to die. They're not just joining, but they're prepared to die. And that's what the Indian government should be worried about. There's no shortage of people willing to accept martyrdom.
Yes, and the number of days that they remain militant is very short because they don't know, they can't fight a trained police, trained army, etc. So they die very quickly.
And there's a second impact of that, isn't there, Mr. Mohanai? We may be killing a lot of militants, but those militants are young and they are someone's children. And the anguish that we are causing to parents, the sense of injustice that we are creating in Kashmiri society is also growing. We are turning Kashmiris away with every young militant we kill. We're not gaining, we're losing.
Yes, we are losing people. We are only creating more alienation, more anger amongst people, till we hit at the root, and the root is the alienation, the anger. Till we hit at the anger, till we resolve those problems, uh, killing militants have given us no solution in the past also, and they will not give us in future.
Very quickly.
And remember, Pakistan is not just going away from here.
Very quickly,
It is-
the time is our enemy. How do we give the Kashmiris now a sense of belief that they are one of us, they will be treated fairly, there will be no injustice, they will be equal citizens in every sense? How do we do that? Clearly,
The
we
first-
can't bring back
yes.
70, and even though the government says one day Kashmir will become a state, who knows when that will happen. So what can we do and say to convince them they have a future with us?
The two things, the two most emotive things is, one is the statehood, the other is the domicile certificate that they are issuing to change the demography of Kashmir. So if those could be put to hold, those could be reversed, and then we hold a free and fair elections and give justice to the Kashmiris. Fair elections, justice, listening to their concerns, etc., and stop demonizing them through the embedded media. If we can do that, we gradually turn the tide around, and we can do it. I am very hopeful that we can do it.
But you're saying
It
a
is
very
not that-
important thing. First of all, the Modi government has to do a U-turn on the domicile certificates and the domicile.
Absolutely,
Do you see?
absolutely.
Do you see this Prime Minister doing a U-turn? So far, he hasn't done a U-turn anywhere that one can recognize.
Yes, I'm not sure, but I'm hopeful that someday it will be done.
And the second,
My
thing
only
you're
point is that we are losing time.
the second thing you're saying, even though you just added we're losing time, time is not on our side. But the second thing you said is, even if this government is prepared to do a U-turn on the domicile certificate, even if it's prepared to grant back statehood, even if the press stops demonizing Kashmiris, it's a process that will take years. It could take a decade. It could take longer. It's not an overnight matter.
Yes. Doesn't matter. Nation building takes years, decades, and maybe centuries. So what?
I want to
Let's
end,
do it.
Mr. Monani, with I think what is practically the last sentence in your second article. I began with the first sentence of the first article. I want to end with what I think is almost the last sentence of your second article. You write, the long-term ramifications of what was done on August 5th, 2019 are unfathomable at present, but be sure they would be grave. The coming generations will have to pay the price for the same. You clearly believe that if there isn't a U-turn, things are going to get worse.
Yes, for 87 rigging, the nation paid a huge price in terms of resources, manpower. We lost so many army soldiers, BSF soldiers, CRPF, J&K police, everybody. Loss of life, loss of Kashmiri life, loss of business, loss of economic opportunity.
And you're saying the same thing will happen again if Mr. Modi remains obstinate and doesn't do a U-turn.
Yes, it could happen. It could happen. It could become even worse. I don't know. It's very unfathomable. So I can't be very sure to say something. But things are not going the right way. This I can at least see this much part.
Mr. Monani, you have been extremely open and candid. You have also opened up the eyes of people who don't know Kashmir's history, who don't understand the way in which Indian politicians, Indian prime ministers have actually taken steps to thwart Kashmir's democracy, to rig its elections, to overthrow its elected governments, and thus created and promoted the sense of separatism. You also very correctly pointed out how Pakistan's attempts to foster terrorism repeatedly failed because the Kashmiri people refused to join hands with Pakistan. They did not want to indulge in violence. But after 87 and the rigging that happened, which Farooq Abdullah and Rajiv Gandhi did, after that the situation played into Pakistan's hands. And sadly, even though we had a brief respite in the last years of Vajpayee, things careered out of control with the Amarnath land route and also with the system's failure to act against the perpetrators of much of it. And now it's going steadily from bad to worse. I'm very grateful to you for having opened our eyes, particularly the eyes of young India who do not know the history of Kashmir and are often not told it accurately by the papers. This is an opportunity they've had to find out the truth. Thank you very much, Mr. Mohani. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.